my name's Ellie and today we're going to be talking about another habitat, so another animal's home. And we're going to start thinking about the polar regions. So I've got my globe here, so point on the screen where you think the polar regions are. So we're talking about the Arctic and the Antarctic. So if you said up the very top here and down at the very bottom here, you're absolutely right. So the Arctic is up the top here and the Antarctic is down at the bottom. And these are some of the hardest places for animals and plants to live because it does get really, really cold. So there's lots of snow and lots of ice, really windy, and it's really difficult conditions for animals to live in. Now, there are millions of people that actually live in the Arctic, so up on the top of the planet here, but actually there are no permanent residents in the Antarctic. So the Antarctic, there's actually a special thing, it's called a treaty, which means that people can't live there permanently. And that's because it's a place for scientific research. So there's lots of scientists that go there to study the animals and the plants, but they don't live there permanently. So now we know about the people living in these areas, let's have a little think about the animals. So let's start at the very top up here in the Arctic. We're going to think about an animal. How about I give you some clues and you can work out if you know who it is. So this animal would live in the snow and the ice, but it is very good at swimming as well. It is the largest bear that you get in the world. It's got white fur, really big paws the size of dinner plates. Has anybody guessed it yet? We are talking about the polar bear. So well done if you guessed the polar bear. So we said there that they've got white fur, but actually their fur is actually transparent. And underneath it, they've actually got black skin, and this helps to keep them nice and warm. They've also got lots of layers of fat to keep them warm too, because living in the Arctic, it gets very, very cold, really windy, so they need those things to keep them nice and warm. Now, we mentioned their big paws. They've got huge paws. They're about 30 centimeters wide, so it's about the size of a dinner plate. So if you can imagine that, it's absolutely huge. You definitely wouldn't want one of those coming at you. So I've got something here to show you that would also live on their paws. So I've got here a polar bear claw. So this is what a polar bear's claw looks like. So as you can see, it's really big and really sharp. So have a little think, what do you think the polar bears would use these for? So if you guessed hunting, you're absolutely right. The polar bears will use their claws to help them when they're hunting. Polar bears like to eat seals, so they would actually use the ice to help them get nice and close to the seals before catching them with their claws. So they'd need to use these big sharp claws to catch hold of them. There's something else they've got that's super sharp too. Have a little think if you can guess what it might be. If you guessed their teeth, you are absolutely right. They've got really sharp teeth. So polar bears, they are carnivores, so they eat meat. And polar bears, they actually spend 50% of their time hunting for food. So that's quite a lot of their time. So if they went hunting 10 times, they would actually only catch things 2 times. So they're only successful 20% of the time. And polar bears, they can swim about 6 miles an hour. So they use those huge, big front paws that we've been talking about to pull themselves through the water. And then their back legs, they use those a little bit like a rudder, and that helps them to swim really fast. Another amazing fact about polar bears, they've actually got 42 razor sharp teeth. That's loads of teeth, and that helps them when they're hunting. So polar bears, they rely heavily on the sea ice because they use that when they're hunting and they can rest on it as well. So with some of the ice melting, it means that it's harder for the polar bears to hunt. So their numbers are declining. So they are classed as vulnerable at the minute, which means that they are an endangered animal. Fantastic. So we've had a little think about the animals up on the Arctic. Now, often when we think about polar bears and what a polar bear might eat, people tell me, oh, maybe they like to eat penguins. But actually, this is not correct, because polar bears live up here in the Arctic and penguins live all the way down here. So there's lots of different species of penguins, but they all live in the southern hemisphere. So they all live down here in the south. So it's impossible for a polar bear to eat a penguin because they live on different sides of the earth. So now let's have a little think about our penguins. So this here is a penguin, and it's a type of penguin called an emperor penguin. Now, one of the things I'd like us to have a little think about are their colours. So have we got any idea why penguins are black and white? Have a little think. Now, if you thought camouflage, you are absolutely right. So camouflage, that's a big science word. That's when the animals blend into the background. And you might think, well, how does that work for a penguin? Because they don't live anywhere that's black and white. But when the penguins go swimming, that's how this works. So if you were an animal swimming underneath the penguin and you're looking up to the sky, you would see its white belly against the sunlit top of the ocean. So that helps them to blend in. But if you were swimming above the penguin and you were looking down on its black feathers, you'd be looking down on the black feathers against the dark, deep sea. So that helps them to camouflage there. So that's how this works, and it's known as counter shading. So the emperor penguins, they are found in Antarctica, and they are the largest species of penguin. Now, penguins are birds. Sometimes we forget about them when we're thinking about birds. If you would like a recap on what makes a bird, check out the classifications video. So the penguins, they do have feathers. They are very small, but they are feathers, and they're covered in feathers. They've got a beak and they lay eggs. Penguins tend to mate for life. So they will mate with each other and they'll stay together for life, and they work together to look after the eggs and the chicks. So while one of them's looking after the egg, the other one will go out to sea to find some food. Emperor penguins, they can dive the deepest out of any birds. They can dive 200 meters deep. Now that's amazing. The emperor penguin is actually one of the only birds to never set foot on land, because they actually live on sea ice in Antarctica. So they've never actually been onto land. And in Antarctica, they are a really important part of the food chain there. So they eat the fish and the squid. And then there are other animals like seals and sharks that eat them. So they're a really important part of the food chain in Antarctica. So now we've had a little think about the penguins in Antarctica and the polar bears in the Arctic. Now there is something that is affecting both of these species and other species in the polar regions, and that is climate change. So as temperatures rise, the sea ice gets smaller and smaller. So that means that animals don't have as much space to live, and that can mean that it's harder for them to find food, because they use the sea ice to help them to hunt, and they live on the sea ice too. Now I know that these areas are a long way away from where we live, so sometimes it might feel like things that we do don't really affect the animals in these parts of the world. But actually there's lots of things that we can do to help them. So just by turning off your lights when you're not using them, don't waste any energy, and even sometimes if you decided to walk rather than go in the car, these are all things that affect climate change. So by making small changes, we can help the planet as a whole, which will help out the animals on these furthest regions of the world.